afternoon, or good evening, everybody. Welcome to this month's Align Coach webinar. People are starting to join us, so it's nice to see you all. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be with us. And as we always do, we will give everybody just a minute or two to hop into the session. And so, as always, if you would like to share with us where in the world you are today, we always love to see how far and wide our audience is today. So please feel free to join the chat and let us know where you are. Like I said, we'll give everybody just a few minutes. Hey, David in Nashville, Tennessee. That's where Jennifer Faught is. More people from Nashville. More people. Franklin, Tennessee. Big audience in the Nashville greater area. Hey, Ryan in Miami. Thanks for joining us. Jennifer, you must draw big in Nashville.
Thank you for that. These are the three people that I know that showed up today.
Sarah says you're the best.
Sarah is on a team that I coach, so she's joining today.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us, Sarah. We're getting more and more people to hop on. We'll give everybody just a few more minutes. Again, if you'd like to share with us where you are in the world today, please feel free to do so via the chat. Hope everybody is having a great day. Hope everyone is getting ready to finish the quarter on a high note, finish strong as we get towards the end of Q1.
Hey, Elizabeth.
More people in Nashville.
It's a good town. We love it here. And it's a beautiful day. It's going to be 80 degrees, sunny after a gloomy kind of March. It's nice.
Same here in New Orleans, Louisiana, which is where I am.
Big group, good group. Nice.
Just give everybody one more minute, and then we will get this thing rolling.
The irony of joining a meeting to talk about meetings.
I was about to say something, but I didn't want to.
We're going to talk about that a lot today.
Yeah.
I will make it worth your time.
This isn't a meeting. This is a webinar.
Semantics.
So, all right, we're at about 2 minutes, probably close to 3 minutes past the hour. Why don't we go ahead and get started? So, hi, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Eugene Turk. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at Align, and I want to welcome you to our monthly coach webinar for March 2023. Hope everyone is doing well. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. This morning, we are thrilled to have Jennifer Faught with a presentation on answering the question of, do we really need a meeting for this? For those of you who may not be familiar with Jennifer, she is a certified scaling up coach out of Nashville, Tennessee, who has helped over 400 business owners develop and execute their strategic plans. Prior to becoming a coach, she built 2 businesses, sold one, and has coached countless others in their growth strategy. She has served on the leadership teams for several scale-up companies, wherein she helped grow revenue by 300% over 3 years after an initial $15 million capital raise. She has been published on and speaks often specifically about communication and processes among teams. So we are honored to have Jennifer present for us and to us this month. As always, just one administrative matter. We want this to be as educational and informational for all of you as possible. Please feel free to pose questions using the chat feature on your Zoom, and we will direct those to Jennifer at the conclusion of her presentation. So thank you again for attending this Align Coach webinar, and I will now turn the microphone over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Eugene. I'm excited to talk to you guys about this today. I get a little nerdy about meetings and communication, but I want to make this as fun and interactive as possible for you all today. So, why are we here? The Small Business Administration reports that 20 to 30% of revenue losses each year are due to inefficiencies. That's a lot, you know? And if that's the case, how much revenue are you losing due to inefficiencies in your business? Part of those inefficiencies are simply due to communication and accountability. And the touch points of communication and accountability are in your meetings. So we have all found ourselves saying, do we really need a meeting for this? Why am I in this meeting? Or that was a waste of my time. I hear this all the time from teams that I coach. And they're all saying, the people that are frontline employees are all saying, we are in too many meetings and we do not have enough time to get our actual work done. Post-pandemic, we have been communicating differently. And if your team is working virtually, you might feel like you don't have visibility into your team. Like if they're not sitting like physically in the office with you. Maybe we have been plugging in more meetings as managers or CEOs because we as leaders are using that as a crutch to lead from a distance. So if you're in that hybrid environment, be thinking about that today. And what we're doing actually is creating more distractions and interruptions in the workday, and that is affecting your efficiencies. If you have a good meeting cadence in place, we're not going to feel like we don't have a pulse on that communication and accountability with our teams. So today, we're going to talk about, what productive meetings look like. I want you to think about when's the last time you left a meeting feeling energized with clear outcomes and having really truly moved something forward. Productive meetings are successful because of two things: proper planning and proper structure. We have to put the proper training in place to make sure that meetings are running effectively in our organizations. And we train our teams on everything else about how to do their job effectively and efficiency, but we don't train them on how to do meetings in your specific organization. Your people are probably bringing bad habits from previous managers or previous companies, maybe even like corporate, things that they're bringing into their meetings aren't the best for your style. Maybe it's current managers or the current company that they're, getting bad habits from. There has to be consistent communication ethos and guidelines on how we host and attend meetings, and we must train our teams on it. So today we're going to learn how to cut down on the meetings that are a tremendous waste of time. We're going to make sure the ones that are actually necessary are productive. And I have 3 tools to make sure that this happens. We're going to talk about meeting rules, how to train your team to run and attend those meetings, and how to do a meeting audit so you can save some time. And we'll talk about how much time you can actually save just by cutting out 1 meeting a week. And when we understand how this fits into your meeting rhythm of your daily and weekly huddles, we can start to eliminate some of those meetings. And finally, we're going to learn how to develop the culture and energy around this change in your organization that needs to happen to save this time. So first, I want to talk about the 2 different types of communication: asynchronous and synchronous. Synchronous communication is like real-time communication. I am able to deliver information to that person and receive something communicated back to me in real time. This is things like phone calls, face-to-face meetings, in person or Zoom or on Teams. Asynchronous is information that is exchanged independent of time. Examples like this are things like email, project management tools, messaging, text messaging. Even a webinar like this is asynchronous. Even though I can see the chat, we are not communicating in real time. And I think for some people, the assumption is that face-to-face and synchronous communication is better than asynchronous. However, I'm hearing more and more from the teams that I work with that they feel like they're in meetings all the time. Too much synchronous communication can actually create interruptions in your workday. It can deplete deficiencies And if it's not done well, it can actually take you longer and be more disruptive than you think. So, and this isn't just the face-to-face meetings. This includes all those kind of like knock on the door, you got a minute, lean up against the door frame conversations that are happening ad hoc too. We also are treating email like it's synchronous communication, and we're using it in a way to have a conversation instead of delivering information. Remember that. We don't use email to have a conversation. To share an experience, story time, I had a CEO tell me that this happened once in his company. There were 2 team members on his team sitting in the same building, on the same floor, in the same hallway, really just like a couple of doors down from each other. And they were emailing back and forth, and the CEO was copied on this email. And he realized that they were having a conversation via email when they were only a couple of doors down from each other. And the conversation had like over 100 replies or something ridiculous. So he is fed up. He walks out of his office. He's like, hey, y'all come here. And he says, let's solve this right now. What they were doing was solving something and having a conversation in email back and forth, which actually took them a lot longer to solve the problem than it would have if they would have gotten up and gone to speak to one another. So we have to stop using email in our organization as a way to have conversations or to solve something or to decide something. It should only be used to deliver information, that kind of communication of big stuff in writing. If you find yourself emailing back and forth as a way to have a conversation or solve something, you just got to pick up the phone and call that person. That is something we all need to be adopting in our organizations. And I think the same goes for Slack. You know, a lot of teams have moved away from email. You're in Slack. Are you solving something on Slack? Pick up the phone and call somebody. Once the decision's made, you can email them or Slack them the result of your conversation. So if we are holding face-to-face synchronous meetings that do not have an agenda, or the agenda is just led by whatever anybody brings and you kind of show up and blow up, is like what I like to say, or we're just reporting out or just regurgitating information in those meetings instead of solving and making decisions. Maybe the host isn't preparing for them, or they're not telling their attendees how to prepare. Or as attendees, we're showing up with a hot cup of coffee and waiting to see what happens, okay? We're not running good meetings if we're doing those things, and they are a waste of our time. So why do we need a meeting? Do I need a meeting for this? If you want to think about, I want you to think about your part of your meetings that can move to asynchronous communication. Here are some examples on the screen of when to keep something as a face-to-face meeting and when to shift to asynchronous forms of communication, or quicker things than just being in a meeting. An example would be like keeping a meeting for solving or decision making. On the left-hand side, it says creative brainstorming, getting unblocked, solving big challenges, big debates, irreversible choices. You need face-to-face meetings for that. Not everything has to be face-to-face though. Use face-to-face to like read when you need to read body language or see somebody's facial expressions. But not everything has to be face-to-face. Sometimes a phone call is better. It's a nice break from Zoom. I do that all the time. On the right-hand side are examples of things you can communicate asynchronously. So this would mean say it over chat, send it in an email, or share a document. I love sending videos to communicate things. So I use a tool called Vidyard. There's also one called Loom to record my face and my screen so that somebody can hear my tone of voice and see my facial expressions instead of me delivering a huge long bulleted list of information that nobody's going to read. These are really simple ways to make your team think differently before they schedule a meeting. Let's look at the status updates or quick, straightforward information, that first one on the top right column. If you're currently working with a scaling up coach, you've rolled out a daily huddle, more than likely. These are really good examples of things to bring to a daily huddle. So even though your daily huddle is face-to-face and you're just reporting out quick updates, daily huddle is a great time to bring KPI updates, status updates, or like really quick two-way door decisions like should this color be purple or blue? And you don't have to have a meeting or call a 30-minute meeting for something like that. Your teams should be asking themselves, should I or could this wait for daily huddle before I send a text, an email, or call somebody? Can it wait for daily huddle? This is going to limit emails in your inbox. It's going to limit interruptions, and others are not going to have those interruptions, so they can stay productive as well. And you're going to get things solved more quickly. Another example is getting feedback or support. Sometimes it's better to send an email out, including the proposal that you want feedback on. So send them the proposal in an email and ask for 3 things to change or improve by Friday. So asking for a response from them asynchronously. But notice, I didn't just say, hey, send me your feedback and just leave it wide open. I said, I have 3 things to change or improve by Friday. Notice it's the who, what, when, who's going to do what by when, and very specific on my request. So there's a mindset shift here for your team to pause and take a moment to think about who I'm inviting to the meeting, and the time that I'm asking them to invest in that meeting. And is it worth it to have them spend time, or can this be delivered via chat, email, or other asynchronous types of communication? I do want to quickly touch on daily and weekly huddles. I do have a quote on the screen here. This was an anonymous survey after a planning day, so I don't know who said it out of this team. I was with this team on Tuesday when we reviewed their survey for the quarter. And I think this just says a lot about having really good structured weekly and daily huddles. So in the chat, I want you to type yes if you were doing a daily huddle. Type yes in the chat if you were doing a daily huddle. This makes my heart so happy. I'm seeing all the yeses come in. Amazing. So you know what a daily huddle is. Now, type yes if you're doing weekly huddles in your organization. Yes, yes, yes. Hallelujah. Okay, good stuff. This is good. Many organizations really struggle to find a meeting rhythm that allows their team members to maximize their time and attain like efficient flows of information. So if you aren't using these 2 meeting rhythms, daily and weekly huddle in your business, I can almost promise you have too many meetings. And even with them, you probably have too many meetings. So we're going to talk about that too. Once daily huddles are rolled out across the organization, if done right, and the entire organization is in a daily and weekly huddle, it's going to cut down on 30 to 40% of your internal emails. It is crazy to watch. It's going to cut down on those kind of day-to-day interruptions that lean up against the door frame meetings. You are going to reclaim time in your day. And your leaders are going to reclaim time in the organization as well. I'll tell you how to do that meeting audit and later on in the presentation that literally, I can show you the math, can save hundreds of hours. And your leaders are going to grow as a result of the communication within the organization. So if you were not doing a daily huddle, quick overview. Daily huddle is a meeting that occurs once per day in a business. Everybody's in one, at least one. And it's a brief meeting. It should not last more than 15 minutes. When we first roll this out to teams and executives, the response is usually, I do not have time for this. Like, I cannot believe you're going to make me do another meeting. But yes, it is that important. No one has time for another meeting, I agree, but you have to make time for this one. And you'll see in the meeting audit later how a daily huddle can act as a replacement for other longer meetings, which actually ends up saving you time. So the 4 rounds of daily huddle are up here. You have your what's up, your key performance indicators, reporting out on top tasks, any stucks or needs that you need, and your top priority of the day. And so each round is read out loud, one at a time, kind of going in a round robin. And everyone's going to read their what's up section and then start over, and everybody will read their stuck or KPI update. And then the last round is everybody reads their top priority of the day. And I'll shout out, because I am with my Align team today that I love so much, using that daily huddle feature in Align is the way to go. Team members will be able to type their update in that, read it out loud, and it'll be less likely to go off of tangents or digressions, right? It's the only way to get it done in 10 to 15 minutes is if we're writing it and reading it. Now, weekly huddle is a 60 to 90 minute discussion to review progress on quarterly priorities and address 1 or 2 main topics for this relevant to that group. So that weekly huddle is held in place of the daily huddle once per week. And it might be obvious to some of you, especially if you're doing these frequently, but you'd be surprised how often the daily huddle or weekly can be confused with each other on what content to bring to it. So be really clear with your team on what to bring to these. Your daily huddle is for everyday business issues that pop up. You're going in, you're sharing, and you're out. And this way, everybody's informed about what's happening. The weekly meeting is more focused on decision-making than the daily huddle. You're solving things. In the weekly, you want to tap into the collective intelligence for the team for 30 to 60 minutes on one or two important topics. And what's really cool about this is it gives your organization the opportunity to resolve 50 to 100 important things each year, which is really, really powerful on how you were able to grow and scale your company. So start with daily huddles. And once you have a good rhythm going with daily huddles, you want to fold in those weekly meetings, and it's going to be really beneficial. Otherwise, your weekly, if you're not doing daily huddle, your weekly is going to become clogged up with smaller tasks and things that are piling up through the week. So if you're only doing weekly, daily is really important to kind of unclog that weekly huddle with the small day-to-day stuff. Similar to a daily huddle, weekly has rounds, they're on your screen. But the important part is running a tight ship, making sure everybody's putting their updates in a line or whatever system you're using, and using that meeting tab in a line is going to be a great option. I've seen people try to retrofit like Google Sheets or Google Docs or project management system to do their daily huddles, and it just doesn't work the same. So it's a great tool to use Align. So you can connect your meeting outcomes to the execution of your strategic plan. So make sure you're using that in the best way possible for your meetings. And if you need help rolling out your full communication plan and meeting rhythms, happy to help or chat with you after the webinar today. Okay, let's dig into the first tool, 9 meeting rules. Let's say you decide to run a meeting, or you run a meeting or schedule a meeting. What are the meeting rules? Tell me in the chat, does anybody have meeting rules posted in conference rooms or have rules around how we do meetings? Or has it been communicated with your teams in any way? Type yes if you are. No for, yep, okay, this is good. Anybody have meeting rules communicated? All right, so tool number 1, super easy to implement. Awesome, John, I'm so glad that you have that. I think it's really helpful. I know Sarah does because I coach their team. So I've created these 9 meeting rules that I put together for companies that I work with. And feel free to take this, make it your own, create what works for your company and your culture, and then train your people on it. I'm going to walk through these at a high level. I think, only inviting essential people for number 1. We should not be inviting everybody and their mother to meetings. Only inviting essential people who are going to help make a decision or solve an issue is important. If somebody needs to just be informed, send them the meeting notes or just tell them what the outcome is that you decided. If they don't need to be sitting in that meeting, they don't need to come. Another example of this would be like team members who are solely going to execute on tasks and they're not involved in the decision or the planning process. They don't have to come to the meeting, and just inform them of what their tasks will be. And no, you don't have to have a meeting to inform them of their tasks, right? Just use a form of asynchronous communication. This would be a great example of where to use a Vidyard video or some sort of project management tool, or assigning tasks in Align if it's connected to priority work. Number 2, no agenda, no attenda. I have a rule when I do one-on-ones with my clients. If you don't send me an agenda or what you want to talk to me about, or what the purpose or the outcome of the meeting is, I don't attend. And that changes behavior really quick. We have to make sure we are setting the outcome of the meeting from the beginning. And if we hold our people accountable to this, the person who never sends out the agenda prior to the meeting is going to start seeing nobody come to their meetings, and that's going to change their behavior. 24-hour notice. It's a different way to host a meeting, to show up and pull up a spreadsheet that nobody has seen before, And, it's like tiny, they've got all these numbers on the screen and somebody's moving the mouse around real fast and your eyes are just like bouncing around because you can't keep up. You're reviewing it real time. And instead of doing that, I want people to send that spreadsheet out ahead of time and allow attendees to review it before they come to the meeting. So you're spending your time solving and deciding instead of reviewing. And, if you're starting a meeting and you have sent it out 24 hours before and asked them to review it and come with their notes prepared, if they haven't, pause the meeting, give everybody 5 minutes to review it instead of like fumbling through trying to get everybody to digest the information and then start deciding. On number 4, I think this is obvious, right? Be on time every time. If the meeting starts at 9 a.m., we're waiting on one person, we go ahead and start. We don't sit there and wait for that person to get there. So just being mindful and respectful of people's schedules. If you start on time, you can end on time. And related to that, being fully present. It means not checking your phone, your email, or multitasking, making sure your meeting attendees and meeting hosts have your full attention as an attendee, right? Number 6 is fun. I know some of you know what this is because I've said it before, so don't spoil the surprise, but it's no piggybacking. Any guesses on what no piggybacking is in the chat? Type in the chat if you know what, or if you have a guess about what no piggybacking means. Some people who are in Vistage might know this. I've seen some Vistage groups talk about this. All right, warming up leftovers. Yes, other topics to bring. Okay. No piggybacking. That's a good one. I like that, Clinton, about no piggybacking, like kind of taking the conversation off course. Adding your 2 cents to someone else's comment. Yes, Alexander. This means that if I agree with the comment that someone has made, I just say I agree with you. There are a lot of meetings that go off the rails with piggybacking because someone agrees and then they just repeat back to you what that person's already said without adding any additional value or context. So no piggybacking, that is about not getting in the weeds. Just say I agree. You don't have to repeat what they said just to hear yourself talk. Or if you're on Zoom or Teams, you can use the thumbs up emoji, the clap emoji, the praise hands emoji, whatever that looks like, so that people know that you agree and that you're aligned with them. That can be a game changer only if you do that rule. Number 7, ask for by when and for clarity. So when it comes to communication, it's like a game of catch, right? So clarifying and seeking to understand by repeating back. So what I heard you say was blank, and making sure that there's alignment and asking for clarity. And when we talk about asking who's going to do what by when, making sure you're reviewing those action items at the end of the meeting, which is number 8. We'll talk about this a little bit more in a second. I'll show you a tool to use for that, which a lot of you've probably seen before, but it's always a good reminder because I talk about this tool all the time and I hardly see anybody ever use it, and it's a really good tool. The outcome of your agenda should be stated at the beginning, and you should remind your attendees of that outcome. And you, as the facilitator of that meeting, have to constantly just be working toward that outcome from the beginning of the meeting. So pushing people in the right direction, not letting them go off on tangents and get off on the weeds. And if everybody knows what the outcomes you're working toward, they're less likely to take it off the rails. And then using that who, what, when at the end of your meeting and reviewing action items. Who's going to do what and by when? And that when is the important part, not W-I-N, W-H-E-N. And lastly, finishing on time. If you've run a meeting well and you've stayed on task, you should be able to end on time. If you've stated the outcome for the meeting and you've continually worked toward that and everybody comes prepared, this should not be an issue at all. So here's that who, what, when. Using this at the end of your meeting, that when is the most important part. So if I request a sales proposal from my team and I don't say by when, they are going to make the assumption potentially that they can get it done a week from today. But I know that I need it today. Like by this afternoon, before close of business, I need to send this because it's a hot lead and I need a proposal immediately. So there is a lot of miscommunication that can happen if we're not saying the by when. So this is an important tool to use in your meetings. All right, another tool for you. This is the second of the 3 for the day. I've given you 3 bonus ones already. I've created a worksheet for the meeting host called the Meeting Planner. It's on your screen here. And this is a tool that will walk them through how to set meeting objectives, the outcomes for the meeting, and it's going to help them prepare before the meeting so that it's worth everybody's time. It's pretty self-explanatory, but it kind of walks them through the before, during, and after, and it helps them see around the curves. And it's going to help them build the agenda and really think through like who actually needs to attend instead of just throwing everybody and their mom on the invite list. This is something that you could have printed out for your teams or print little cards, leave it on their workstations if they're in person. I've had teams like copy and paste this into like a template when they go to create a meeting. And so use this as a part of training when you're creating your meeting rules. Let's talk about a meeting audit. I'm sure that that you're thinking like about agendas and meeting rules now and how you can go improve your current meetings. But I also want us to walk through what your current meetings look like right now and make sure that they're still serving their purpose. Sometimes we can get so used to how things are just done and we never take a step back to see any opportunities for improvement. And it's really easy to fall into a rhythm and say things like, well, this is just the way we've always done it. We always have had a CapEx meeting, or it's been like this from the start. And while you may also think if it isn't broke, don't fix it, sometimes you just don't know if it's broken until you really dig in and look at it. So we're going to step back and reevaluate your other meetings on your calendar, internal meetings, to show you how to do a meeting audit. Some of them may no longer be necessary. Some of them could be replaced or eliminated simply by bringing that information to a daily or weekly huddle. And this meeting audit is like a pulse check to do with all of the meetings on your internal meetings that are happening within your organization. Or if you're not like at an executive level and have control over this, you can do this with your own meetings on your own calendar that you take part of in a consistent basis. So when we do this audit, you're going to establish if the meeting is being held at the right cadence, and if the time spent within the meeting feels productive and effective. We've all had meetings that we've been like, what is the point of this? So doing this meeting audit is hopefully going to help you answer that question or ask yourself that question less often. So let's walk you through some examples. Meeting audit. The outcome of this, notice how I said outcome, is to show you how to use this template and what to look for. And then you can spend your time after today filling it in. I do have some resources that I can share afterwards in the follow-up. But you can just create a simple Excel spreadsheet of this. And you can do this as an individual, or you can apply this to your whole company if that's the seat that you sit in your organization. So first, along that left-hand column, you'll make a list of every internal meeting that you attend on a regular basis. This is important though. If you are working with a coach or you have worked with a coach in the past, you're likely doing daily and weekly huddles and you've rolled out a meeting rhythm. The point of this is not to eliminate any of those daily and weekly huddles, but to find what meetings you can eliminate or pull information from to put into daily or weekly huddle that is good for the shared consciousness of the organization or speed of information. So if you are tempted to combine or change your meeting rhythm that you've worked with for a coach that to kind of cascade throughout your organization, please, 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 please talk to them first before you start changing that official cascade. Today, I really want you to be focused on the meetings that happen outside of those daily and weekly meeting rhythms. So in your audit, you'll write down each meeting, whether it is scheduled or not. Sometimes it's an ad hoc meeting that's like that conversation's happening frequently, but there's no formality to it or there's nothing on the schedule for it. So think about those ad hoc ones as well. Next, you're going to continue filling in those columns. And here are some examples on the screen, and we'll talk about action items next. You'll write down how long the meeting is, when does it typically occur, like day and time of the week, who attends it, like just listing all the names, what's the purpose of it or the outcome, and does it have an agenda? Yes or no? Woo, hopefully there's not a whole lot of no's on that one. So let's look at this first example that's highlighted in red. We can talk about what action items to take. First example is for the sales pipeline review. In this example, we eliminated that meeting, and now that content is going to be brought as a part of the sales and marketing weekly huddle. The internal project prep. For this one, we created a scheduled cadence for this meeting with an agenda. It did not have an agenda. And what was happening is like project teams were all meeting separately on each project. And what they ended up doing here was they decided to bring everybody into one meeting, and all project team members joined, or project leads could join. And not just those assigned to a specific project. So they are working individually. And now they were working individually. Now they can all kind of learn from each other no matter what project they're on. So that was really important for them for a shared consciousness situation. This exec team meeting, they were not using an agenda. They were just kind of like showing up with their information from that functional seat that they sit in. And they were spending 2 hours in a meeting. And so for this one, we created an agenda. We made sure everybody was following it. We put it in a line, and we were able to get that meeting down to 90 minutes instead of 2 hours. The next one is a CapEx meeting. So this one was, we removed the superintendent from that meeting because the purpose of the meeting was to review the financial aspects of the company, and the superintendent did not need to be there. This is a manufacturing company. They did not need to be there. So the CEO could attend the CapEx meeting and deliver that information to the superintendents afterwards, asynchronously. And here's an example, the last one, of clients. So external meeting here. If you have standing meetings with clients, letting them know what the agenda is going to be so that they can prepare and understand what's going to be discussed, and then setting up that cadence so they know what to expect. So a meeting audit, this is a great tool to use to determine what meetings are working for you and what aren't working for you. And so analyze it, fill it in. If you get stuck answering the question in that third to last column, what is the purpose of this meeting? If you can't answer that, you can probably just stop right there. If you can't clearly define a meeting's purpose, you probably don't need that meeting, right? Look for overlap in agenda items from one meeting to the next. If you're talking about the same things in different meetings, why? If you don't have a good reason for that, find a way to streamline and combine. Maybe you can consolidate meetings further by changing who attends meetings. So maybe you have 2 different meetings that are talking about similar topics, and there are 2 different, like the meeting attendees are the same except for 2 people. Maybe combine those meetings and just bring those 2 people into the other one. And then thinking about the order of your meetings. What makes sense for order? Are you getting the information flow you need throughout the week to be effective? An example being that the CapEx meeting from the previous example would need to come before their board of directors meeting each month, right? So action items for this on the screen to help you think through it. Once you take a closer look at your meetings and analyze whether they have a clear purpose, they have the right people, they have an effective agenda, and they're happening at the right time, now you can go make some decisions. If you or the team feels uncomfortable completely doing away with like long-standing meetings, like we've always done it this way meetings, just do a test. Decide what you'll change and schedule it, do it for like a month or do it for a whole quarter, and then schedule the time to talk about how it went. You can always go back to the old way, but I bet once the team gets used to that new habit, everybody's going to appreciate the time saved by eliminating wasted meetings. So how often you do this, a meeting audit, will likely depend on the size of your organization, how many meetings executives are attending on a regular basis, et cetera. A good place to start is by taking a deep dive into your company's meetings at the start of each fiscal year, and then maybe again at the halfway point of the year. That way, if something's amiss or it's just not working or can be improved, you're not spending, a year or so holding unproductive meetings. So let's look at the math. Check this out. So if you were able to just save 60 minutes a week in meetings, which should not be that hard to do, you're saving 52 hours a year potentially if you had a meeting every week, right? Now, some of that's going to be vacation time, so maybe it's a little bit under 50, but that's over a work week's worth of time. One company I worked with to help build out their meeting rhythms for the entire company, we were able to save them over 6 hours a week in meeting time. And that's across the whole company. That's 312 hours for multiple people. And so if there were 5 people in each meeting, they're saving like thousands of hours company-wide. So this is a bigger deal than just putting some rules and training in place. This is literally increasing your productivity time. Rate the meeting. This is another way, kind of another tool. This is moving into away from the audit tool, but moving into like, how do we create this culture shift in your company? The big thing here is to get your team to make the shift, and it's going to take consistency and discipline. An example here on the screen is how one company I worked with had a theme for the quarter about rating their meeting at the end of the meeting. So what they did was they sent out a survey at the end of every single meeting. The host of that meeting asked for a score on a scale of 0 to 10. And if you gave it a 9 or below, they had to give feedback on anything under a 9 about how it could be improved very specifically, right? Now, this was shared and reviewed at the weekly exec meetings for major transparency, and everybody was able to get feedback here, and it worked really well for this company. In fact, at the end of a weekly, you may have noticed in that agenda that I put up earlier, the last step is rate the meeting. So going around the room and saying, rate the meeting, and if you score below a 9, tell me how it can improve. That is the single best way to improve the effectiveness of your meetings, just by being honest about where we need to get better. Now, if this thing on the screen feels like it's way too intense for your company, which is possible, you can create a theme around your daily and weekly huddle meeting rhythms within your organization. You can figure out how to track KPIs to say, like, did we review action items? Did we do a meeting rating, etc. The gamification of it is what's going to make it get done. And that's that consistency and repetition to form that habit. So on the screen is an example of a company making sure that they were using daily and weekly huddle appropriately and entering their information into a line as a KPI to track that. And at the end of the quarter, if they reached a certain metric, they all got to go do something fun as a group. The theme always has to have that measurable outcome of how you track it, right? Another way to track how you're doing in meeting rhythms is by setting up some sort of quarterly critical number instead of a KPI, maybe like as a priority on the screen. You can see that critical number on the top right, and making sure that you are just, again, instilling the discipline in the team to make this shift. So the main point about this is that you have to have consistency and discipline to make the change. This is one of my favorite quotes. If you're consistent, you will get it. If you are consistent, you will keep it. So this is a discipline thing. It has to be habitual. And just like the habits we have in our lives, habits ebb and flow. I mean, how many of us are not doing the thing that we set out to do on January 1st? So we have to have, it's the same thing happens in organizations, habits ebb and flow. So we have to adjust and be reminded of the cadence and the commitment that we've made. So to stay consistent and to keep the discipline, we have to do that in our meetings too. Make action items apply to this meeting audit for your internal meetings. Create meeting rules lists. Hold your teams accountable to it. Or if you aren't in a place to control this company-wide, apply it to your own meetings. And I think others will start to catch on, right? Just remember, stay consistent and you're going to keep it. So as we close, if your meetings have turned into like a bird's nest that feels really hard to undo, find a coach to help. My contact information is on the screen. I love communication strategy and meeting rhythms. I'm self-appointed nerd and expert in this. So if you're ready to save time and feel more productive in your meetings, reach out to myself or your coach and talk to them about what this looks like for you. And I think Eugene will have some stuff to follow up with you afterwards. So I can share that 9 meetings poster. I can share the spreadsheet, et cetera, for you to use as the tools.
Thank you, Jennifer. As a matter of fact, there was a question posed as to whether or not you would be willing to share the slides of your presentation. Great. And for those of you who are here, we will send those out after the webinar as part of the blog summary that we prepare. So yes, slides will be provided. Speaking of the audit, which you were just discussing, there was a question posed as to who populates the meeting audit.
So you can do this one of two ways. You can audit your own meetings. So you as an individual in the company, just take a look at what your month looks like or what your week looks like, and see which ones you feel like are less important, or that you want to talk to the host. Like maybe you're an attendee and you're like, can we do something differently about this? You can manage up on meetings. Or if you were sitting at like in an operational role, like COO or CEO, this is a strategic thing. So you should be looking at this at a high executive level down across the entire company. That's how we get to that 1,500, saved hours a year, is by looking at it that way.
The question that was posed, Roberto asked the question. I heard you say that in doing the audit, if you are unable to state the purpose of the meeting, then there probably shouldn't be that meeting. He went on to ask the question, well, if there's no agenda that's needed for the meeting, or you can't come up with an agenda for the meeting, is that another indicator that that meeting is not necessary?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I always use the term, like the phrase, like show up and blow up, or you're showing up with a hot cup of coffee and waiting for a meeting to break out. It's just not a good use of time if we aren't following an agenda. So if it's hard to find an agenda, it might not be a good meeting. The other thing to think about is, and what I love about the meetings in Align, especially for weekly, is that the content is populated by what people are bringing to the meeting, but the agenda is like the sequence of the meeting, right? So you might start off with sharing good news, and then you review your priorities, and then, hey, does anybody have quick things to report out? And then we go solve. That's the agenda, not the bullet points with what everybody's brought, right? So that's what's so good and makes a strong weekly huddle really strong, is that we're writing it ahead of time and we're kind of filling in the agenda based off of the content we're putting into that weekly huddle. Does that make sense?
It does. Roberto, if you have other questions about that, please feel free to add them to the chat. And certainly anybody else, if you've got questions, now's a great time to put them into the chat. There was a question that was posed earlier in the presentation that was whether or not you had any tips for keeping people from distractions while others are sharing during the meeting, and so that they are paying attention to everyone while everyone is sharing and not just while they're speaking themselves.
Yeah, this happens a lot to me in planning sessions while I'm leading an 8-hour planning day. It's a long time to keep people's attention for 8 hours. Sometimes it's a gentle nudge, like, hey, if you can see somebody's like sitting there on their phone. Hey, you still with us, Eugene? Oh yeah. Hey, do you mind just putting your phone down? Just being direct about it in a kind way. But I've also gone so far as to like making people put their phones in a box before they come in. Computers closed, right? Like laptops closed in the meeting, unless you were having to look at something and reference something to present. So I think the no technology rule is good, unless you're using it in the meeting. We just have to be direct and create the ground rules for it, that this is how we do things. And, if I'm a host and nobody's paying attention, I'll be like, do we need to come back at another time? Like, are you guys not ready for this? Or, can you please just help me out here? Comments.
Yeah, and if I could just add, certainly one of the best practices that we always sort of promote is this concept of taking 5 minutes before any meeting that you are going into, whether it be a daily huddle or a weekly huddle, and going in, whether using Align or some other tool, to actually do some pre-thought about what is it that I want to share with the rest of my team. If it's a daily huddle, what is my what's up? And go ahead and write down, or populate into a software tool. What is it that I need to share? What have I done in the past 24 hours? What am I working on today? What are my stucks, etc.? Because just doing those 5 minutes of pre-thought is what keeps the meeting very productive and very efficient, so that, like you said, it doesn't go off the rails. No one is sort of off the cuffing, trying to, bumble and stumble through their brains about what they want to share with the rest of the team. And I will make a small clarification that we certainly encourage people, when you are in an in-person meeting, to bring your phone so that you could then read. I think you even said it,
Yes.
Write it, then read it, because you've taken the time to do that pre-thought. You've populated it somewhere. Go ahead and then share that exact information with the rest of the team, because you've already identified that that's the most important items that you need to share and exchange information out to the rest of your team.
Yeah, and to that point, it's just as important to show up as an attendee prepared as it is as the facilitator of the meeting, So preparing and showing up, having thought through it, everybody has to work together to make a meeting great. It can't rest on the shoulders of just the person who's hosting it.
Tanner posed a question. I hope I'm understanding the question correctly. I don't know if he was asking for more clarity on the importance of how the daily meeting supports the weekly meeting. And then maybe a follow-up question as to how tracking metrics and pulling data into, your KPIs, your critical numbers into those meetings, whether that's one of the main reasons that those meetings are so productive and successful within each team or organization.
I can go back to this example here. I think I'm still sharing my screen. At the very bottom, we just rolled Weekly Huddle out to this team in Q1. And so the executive team was starting their Weekly Huddle. And what we knew was, if the meeting was successful, if they were able to do the meeting rating at the end. And so we said there are 10 weeks in this quarter, and this person had to own this as a company priority to say, did we or did we not rate the meeting at the end? Because that's how I knew they were going to get better and create the discipline around how they ran the meeting. And so that's the culture shift, like seeing the metrics there is what's going to make that meeting successful. I'm not sure if you can provide a little bit more clarity around the daily and weekly and how they support each other. I think from my perspective, daily huddle is like the quick hits, like informing and information. It's that 24-hour news cycle throughout the business, and it allows us to very quickly push information up and down throughout an organization. You're not really solving in that meeting, you're informing. Weekly, we really want to get to a place where we are solving and discussing things instead of just regurgitating information.
Jennifer, to that point, I wanted to just get your thoughts on other cadences of meetings. So, obviously quarterly planning sessions where you're coming up with the strategy and building out priorities for the next 90 days. What are your thoughts on having a monthly sort of all hands meeting where it's not just the team, but you're really bringing many people together to really sort of go over, maybe you're going through all of the company priorities or individual priorities, the KPIs, the critical numbers. How does that type of meeting cadence work best?
Yeah, I love that as a style of like celebration and togetherness and bringing people together to remind them of the bigger picture and to stay focused on those quarterly priorities. I love an all hands and all staff, whatever you want to call it, from a monthly standpoint. You almost kind of call it like the state of the organization's presentation, where you can also recognize people. So that's a culture thing. I think it's important to have a leadership, either executive or like senior leadership, monthly to review progress on your strategic plan as well. So that when you do get to another meeting rhythm of your quarterly planning day, you're not going, gosh, that was 3 months ago. Why did we choose this again? Or man, it's really hard to pull these numbers for these targets because we haven't really talked about it in like 13 weeks, So the meeting rhythms of then scaling up, there are like 9, potentially, once you roll it all out, 9 accountability touch points across for your organization. And that is where the scale happens. That's where the growing quickly but not recklessly happens, is within the meeting rhythm.
Oh, Tanner just provided some clarification. He was saying that they only do weekly meetings and it's full of too much information. He was wondering if you could just provide some clarity on why the daily meeting is so valuable as it rolls into the weekly meetings for those teams.
Yeah, your weekly needs to be less tactical, right? So if you do that daily huddle, you're going to unclog that weekly and be able to pull up and look 1 to 2 weeks out versus like the 24-hour news cycle. If you start doing daily huddle, your weekly huddle is going to be so much stronger, because you're not going to repeat the same things in a daily huddle that you would in a weekly huddle. Examples of like things that get brought up in weekly is some of it's going to be like reporting out, hey, don't forget, like I'm on vacation next week and you need to go to Eugene instead of me for this process or this action. But also it's like, hey, I want to pull this up and let's solve this together. The new website is live. I sent it to you to review. Can we walk through it really quick? Or big things that need to be solved in the next 1 to 2 weeks to move the business forward.
All right, one more cadence that I wanted to ask you about, and that's helping people be better managers and doing one-on-ones with their direct reports. What's the right cadence, or what's the recommended cadence for those types of meetings? Because I feel like every week is probably too often, and once a month is probably not often enough. Is every other week the right cadence for that type of meeting, and what should those types of meetings really cover that's different than, say, a weekly huddle that you're having with your team?
Yeah, so I think 3 things to keep in mind about one-on-ones. Yes, every 2 to 3 weeks. Sometimes 2 weeks is even too frequent. It depends on the position. You know, if somebody really needs a lot of hands-on guidance, then do every 2 weeks. And maybe you're really working on them to develop their leadership skills, do every 2 weeks. Sometimes it's 3 weeks. But the important thing is to keep it consistent. The second thing to remember about one-on-ones is that you have your coach and your coachee, or your mentor and your mentee, or manager and direct report. The manager is not the one bringing the content and not creating the agenda. It has to be driven. The content has to be driven by the person who is being coached in that meeting. That is where leadership skills are developed. And so when I mentioned earlier, I don't show up if somebody doesn't put their content in and tell me what we're going to talk about. I work with somebody one-on-one, and I have in a line, I have our one-on-one set up, and they are supposed to populate that agenda. And I like to have it the day before because I'll review it and I can come prepared with things to help them with, and my brain can kind of workshop things out for them. And I'll text them and say, hey, or Slack them and say, hey, you didn't put your agenda in. So do you need to reschedule? And then they're like, oh, I'll do it right now instead of 5 minutes before the meeting, So it has to be driven by them instead of by me. It can't be my agenda. Now I can certainly coach to things like skill set and competencies and that sort of thing during that meeting. And I think the third thing is, I already mentioned, is that consistency, and like creating that agenda, using the tool for one-on-ones in a line is also a huge help.
Awesome. All right, we're just a few minutes to the top of the hour. If anybody has any other questions, now is your last chance to go ahead and pose those in the chat. I certainly want to thank everybody for attending today's webinar. A big thank you to Jennifer for a really wonderful presentation. Obviously, you can see all of her contact information there in that last slide, should you wish to reach out to her with any follow-up questions. We'll give everybody just one last opportunity. Any other questions? John saying so helpful. Thank you so much. Add on to Eugene's questions. Should the one-on-one agenda or structure be different from the weekly and the daily meetings?
Absolutely. So the structure would include like sharing good news, but I want them to tell me what the number one outcome is they want from this meeting in their agenda, and the top 3 things they need help from me. So share good news, review their priorities. If they're in a line and they're in your strategic planning sessions, pull up their priorities, coach them through that. Where are they stuck? Where do they need help? What are they doing well? What's the outcome of our conversation today? The number one thing, and then the 3 things that you need help from me on today. And then hopefully they provided some more context, filling that agenda out, and then reviewing action items at the end of it. So that's really your cadence of the agenda for one-on-ones.
Awesome. All right, as always, we encourage you to use the Align software to handle and manage your daily, your weekly, your monthly communication habits. make your meetings more productive and efficient. If you need some assistance or more information, please be sure to ask or simply email us at support@aligntoday.com. Thanks again. We hope you will join us for our next coach webinar. Until then, we hope everybody has a fantastic day. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Bye.